Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Sunday edition of True Crime with the Sarge. I'm your host, Joseph Giacalone, and we have another great guest today who needs no introduction, Joe Scott Morgan. Thanks for showing up today and giving us everything you got. I appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure, Joe. Good
So
to see you guys.
how are you doing? It's been a bit since CrimeCon.
Yeah, it really has. That was a whirlwind, whirlwind event, and I'm just kind of that's kind of in the rearview mirror now. Kind of looking toward Nashville now, and I'm going to be going to London in September for CrimeCon over there. So that'll be London's one of my favorite places, and England is, and I've spoken over there, several times over the years, and looking forward to going back and kind of. I think it's a different vibe over there for CrimeCon. It's more it's a bit more intimate, and as you know, there was not a lot of intimacy in Orlando. That was kind of a vast. You stand up there and you look out from the lectern and you see just this sea of people, man, and it was quite something.
Yep, and I think we're going to see you in the Hamptons too, right?
Yeah, that's the plan. Kim and I, my wife, we're going to be going up there, and I think I'm going to be chatting about probably chatting about Piketon while I'm up there. I'm looking forward to it. We've never been to Long Island, and I've got a lot of friends that are from that neck of the woods, and I know that's a big neck of the woods because I keep trying to make sense of it, how it's kind of laid out, and there's all these little villages along the way, and each one has a different personality. And I'm kind of intrigued, because the only time I've ever spent in New York is in the city, and I'm looking forward to getting out and going down Long Island. So I think that'll be a lot of fun.
Yep, it'll be me, you, and Mac together again for that. The Hamptons who've done it. That should be a lot of fun.
Oh, I think so.
So you kind of mentioned it already, but I want to start off with, so you've actually got some exciting news, right? So you filmed this show for Oxygen and it was picked up by Peacock, right? About the Piketown massacre, Piketown murders. You're kind of excited about this, right? This thing's really taken off. It's like one of the most watched episodes that they've ever had.
Yeah, there was actually an article that dropped in, I think the name of I think they consider it to be, what those people out there in LA call the trades. Like Deadline and Variety and all that. There was an article that dropped in The Wrap is the name of it, and the article detailed how it's the title of the show. There's been a couple of iterations of it because there was the Piketon Massacre podcast, which I've been on for 3 years now with KT Studios, and KT Studios produced a television show, which NBC wanted to change the name of it to the Pike County Murders, a family massacre. And of course, it dropped the day after Thanksgiving when everybody's together with their families. I don't know about you. I worked a lot of really bad cases over Thanksgiving, as a practitioner. Probably the worst time of year ever, ever as a death investigator. Or people think it's Valentine's Day or even Christmas, but Thanksgiving for some reason for me was always the worst. But anyway, it kind of dovetailed with the celebration around Thanksgiving. We watched it anyway. I'm prattling. The article stated that it is the most viewed premiere in 5 years for Oxygen.
Nice.
So it was really cool. It's cool to be a part of. And the lady that directed it, Catherine Park, I urge you to check her out. She actually directed another show that I was privileged to be a part of called Murdered and Missing in Montana, about these 4 indigenous girls who died, and very tragic story. It was also on Oxygen a couple of years back. But if you can find beauty in anything aesthetically, these shows are beautifully filmed, and it's, she has this incredible eye. And I think that goes to telling, it helps with telling the story. It's such a tragic story and so hard to, kind of, wrap your brain around how, you could wipe out an entire generation of one family like this.
Yeah, so without getting into the spoilers, right? This because we want people to watch it. There's a couple people in the chat say they've already seen it. They say it's great, but without getting into the spoilers, we could just talk about the tangential stuff. So you have it was 8 murders. There's 4 different crime scenes, right? And then he did something that's really unusual to me, but I actually think it was a good move, and that's moving the crime scenes not once but twice. So let's talk a little bit about that from the death investigator standpoint.
Yeah, for me, and just let me frame this out a little bit. This area that we're talking about is in Appalachia, and it's in southeastern Ohio, near the confluence of Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia. And it's very isolated. It's beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful countryside. When you get up there, I don't know what my light is doing anyway. It's quite lovely. Countryside, green, lush, rolling hills. And these families lived, there were 3 scenes that occurred on one road called Union Hill Road. And all of the families lived in mobile homes. And when you think of a mobile home, most of the time, you don't really think of it as a home per se, but these mobile trailers have been there for a long, long time. Obviously they're all stubbed in. The axles and the wheels are non-functional at this point for so many years. And actually one of the homes, Dana Roden's home, was built off of. So you've got this one structure that had to be disconnected from the rest of it, and that had to be transported. So, and then there was another scene that was 7 miles away from Union Hill Road, which it was really isolated. It was on an unimproved dirt road. And so all of these scenes were essentially moved, which was a Herculean task. I had problems with it in the beginning, but the caveat to that is they spent a long time processing the scenes beforehand. However, the question, I think it begs the question, would you have done this with a standard frame home, standalone structure? And so the question really never came up in court. You've already gone through a series of pleas and admissions and one conviction per trial. We've got another trial still coming up. Why are you going to treat this differently than any other scene? I think is a question maybe that a defense attorney would want to ask. And I thought that they were going to ask it. It never, why are you going to separate these out? Because as you know, with a structure like this, the interior dynamics of this thing are going to change. And so you've got multiple firearms that have been fired within the structure. Any kind of trajectories that you've pulled, you better make sure that you've done all of this and done it thoroughly before you decide to hook this thing up to a truck. And because it'll never be plumb again. Plumb relative to, these structures sitting there for all of these years. But never in my experience starting my career in New Orleans and then finishing my career in Atlanta with the ME there. And we've got and people will laugh, but we've got a lot of trailer homes in the South. Never have I encountered a case where you didn't just have one, you had 4 that were moved from the primary location to this kind of storage area, hangar, kind of place. It was certainly odd. And I think personally, this is something that perhaps when all of the data is finally released, this is something as a college professor, I'm going to want to dig into with my students, because I think there's a lot you can learn from it. I'm not saying it's never happened. Obviously it's probably happened somewhere, but just from an academic standpoint and a training standpoint, I think it's quite fascinating.
Well, I mean, especially, in New York, we never could move a house or an apartment building. You don't have that option, but we've taken staircases. We've taken,
taken walls,
taken sheetrocks out of the,
Yeah.
plaster of Paris. I mean, you name it, cut up the
Yeah.
floors. Just because there was a bloody handprint, just take the
Absolutely.
whole railing. But
Yeah.
when you're talking about taking a whole trailer, I
Yeah.
mean, you're really talking about, really, you could do a lot of damage. Now, I'm assuming they wrapped these things all up before they moved them, right? So did they seal them as best as they
They sealed
can?
them as best they can, but as far as wrapping goes, you can go on and you can. And this is, I got to point this out because I know people haven't been there. I've been there multiple times to each one of the scenes, absent the structures, just the physical location, Joe. Okay. And so what's fascinating about me is that the roadway to get in and out of this place, you literally have to pull over onto the shoulder of the road to allow oncoming traffic to pass by. I know when I was there with one of the production teams, we were in a vehicle and we had let me get this straight. We had a John Deere tractor with plow attachment on the back. We had to give way. And so now you're talking about a very large structure where you're having to make all of these tight turns on very narrow lane. Police are going to have to go before you. And just because you get off of Union Hill Road, that's not where the journey ends, dude. I mean, you've still got this kind of circuitous route that you have to run. So they're having to block traffic all the way along, go at a snail's pace in order to finally get there. You're not winding up on any kind of large 4-lane road, where the state police are going to come out and block everything off and you're going down. That's not really the way this was. And so it was kind of just fascinating. It's certainly one of the more memorable things among many others, relative to the nature of these crimes that were committed. 8 homicides. And, you go back to the core of this thing, and that's what you're talking about. You're talking about 4 separate scenes, one night, 8 homicides. And I know, I can't speak for you. Okay. I know that you've handled multiple homicide scenes or a homicide scene with multiple deaths. However, I think that for any jurisdiction, this would be daunting. No, regardless of how big your jurisdiction is. Then you get them kind of spread out like this. It's a logistical nightmare. You're going to have to break everybody down into teams. Everybody's going to have to stick with their assignments. You can't get distracted from everything. And then you're going to have a very, very strong lead investigator on all this. And that wound up falling to the state police. Because, this little county, they don't experience anything like this. Their county coroner he's a country doctor. He's elected coroner. You imagine rolling out there and you're faced with this. And then the bodies themselves had to be taken all the way to Hamilton County, which is Cincinnati, to be autopsied. And you're talking, I think I'm going to get this wrong, but 80 to 95 miles west, maybe 100. So you're having to transport the bodies. Then you're going to have to send manpower there to be present for the post, because you want eyes on at the post just to hear what the pathologist is going to say. It was a logistical nightmare. I mean, it truly was. But all things being equal, I think that they did a jam up job.
Yeah, no, I never had 8 homicides regarding to one specific event, right, or one specific person. But I mean, as a supervisor in the detective squad, I think I had 6 in one night, different locations, but none of them are related. I mean, you have, you 1 here, you 2 here, you 3 there. It can get crazy running back and forth and doing all this stuff. But I mean, the whole thing comes out to a motive of just like, of this custody of this kid, right? I mean, it's just like, execution style murders. People are sleeping in their homes. I mean, they originally police went with their theory that this was like a drug cartel kind of thing.
Dope. Yeah. They were thinking that this was dope because it's listen, it's a hand to mouth existence where these folks live. Okay. You don't have factories popping up all over the place where they're saying, hey, we're now hiring. Those jobs left a long time ago. They had coal mines around there, for a number of years. There are not a lot of jobs, and I'm not making excuses, but people have to do what they have to do in order to provide for their families. And so, both of these families had connectivity to grow operations with weed. And even, when you got to Chris Roden's trailer, which is, he was the primary target in this. He was in the trailer with his cousin who was visiting from Kentucky. They found a big grow operation behind his home, and it was kitted out pretty well. And then his brother, who I'd mentioned, the one body that they found 7 miles away, he lived in, the Brits would call it a caravan. It's kind of a tow behind, a little trailer. But it was stubbed in. He had a porch built onto it. Well, he had a smaller grow operation there. And Joe, you get into these isolated nooks and crannies like this, and I think from an investigative standpoint, you have to think, first off, who would have the knowledge to negotiate this area? I'm just talking about geographically, and topographically as well, because it's rugged territory. I went to visit the scene where Kenneth Roden was killed, in his little, caravan trailer. It's unimproved dirt road, and then you have to go through a wash to get to the house and drive back up a hill. So that goes to, I think, when you're looking at this investigatively, it goes to people that would have knowledge specific to this event. If you looked at it from a military operation, you would know that somebody had gone out and done reconnaissance. They had that kind of knowledge at that level. They had an awareness of security systems because they disabled them. At Chris Roden's house in particular, I think they removed the hard drive. There were dogs. The dogs didn't alert. They were familiar with the individuals that showed up. So, you begin to think about it, and it begins to kind of, you're creating that investigative funnel that's kind of narrowing down, as you're looking at, that whoever did this, first off, had a lot of anger. They were highly motivated, and they had knowledge.
Yeah, no, I mean, put together a great case. I mean, like everything else, you start off with your theories, and then the evidence and everything prove it. But you gotta pay attention to the details, right? You gotta look at the details on these things. And like you said, the dogs are another big, tip off.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, especially, I'm sure these dogs are, not friendly to any other stranger, because they probably don't see too many strangers coming up around that area.
No, and it reminded me, kind of on a lighter side, I guess. It reminded me of the old Jim Croce song, Leroy Brown with "Meaner Than a Junkyard Dog." And when you rolled up, and I urge anybody that is not familiar with, first off, the Piketon Massacre podcast, or with, the Pike County murders, go and take a look at the aerial photography, and you'll see Chris Senior's trailer is, like I said, it was the primary target. Joe is completely surrounded by, these skeletal remains of cars in various states of disrepair. It looked like he was living in the midst of a junkyard. But the reason that those cars were there, it's not he just went out and grabbed abandoned cars and pulled them up in the yard. He was what's referred to as a shade tree mechanic. If you had problems, bring your car to Chris, and he'll take a look at it, see if he can fix it. He's got spare parts laying around, and everything's off the books. So, cash only. We'll take a look at it. And so he's living amongst his work. And isn't that an interesting thing? You got the cars out front, you got the dope out back, and everything's facilitated from this one location. And people were aware of that, and they could negotiate this area.
Yep, and putting this all together. So everybody, if you're just joining us now, we're up to 110 people watching this live.
Hey, guys.
Joseph Scott Morgan. Everyone
Thanks
knows.
for having me.
Yeah. Well, listen, thanks for coming on. I know
My
you're
pleasure.
a busy man. You're a big TV star.
Oh, come on.
Big TV star. I know. Listen, I just want to segue from, because I don't want to give out any more, background on this case. I want people to watch the show on Peacock. Is it Peacock or Peacock Plus? Someone had asked in the.
That's an excellent question. I do know this. It's an Oxygen product, and the way it was explained to me, and it's all owned by NBC, just so that everybody understands. Because I went through a big learning curve with this. So NBC Universal owns everything. All right. So we established that. Oxygen is who produced it. It premiered on their channel. You can still get it, I think, on demand with Oxygen, but Peacock obviously is owned by NBC. And so they take selected items from Oxygen and their other locations, and they pull them over. So if you get tired of watching Parks and Rec or The Office, You go watch the Pike, the Pike County murders. But yeah, it was, it's been pulled over there, and it was absolutely grand to be a part of something like this. And because we've been um, uh, I've been involved in this for so long now, and you feel like all the players, and not all of them, but you develop these relationships with people as you go through this. Anjanette Levy, I think you probably
Yep.
had Anjanette on the show
Yep.
before, who's an absolute angel. She was on it as well. And let me tell you something. You talk about one of the hardest working people in media. You'd have to go far afield to find anybody else other than maybe Brian Enton. With Anjanette, though, I still have this image of her freezing to death in Idaho outside of that home. And of course she was spot on the ground when this whole thing started in Piketon, because it's not, as a crow flies, it's about 85 miles east of Cincinnati where she hangs her hat.
Yeah, no. So I'm going to segue, and you mentioned Idaho, because I just want to segue into Idaho for just one reason: the crime scene, right? So we saw how the crime scene is handled in Pike, where they're wrapping these things up and moving them, and then we see how the crime scene was handled in Idaho. I haven't been a big fan of how they handled the crime scene. What's your take, Joe?
Yeah, I haven't either at all. I think for me, it all started relative to how many looky-loos they had showing up, even prior to, who set their foot across that threshold that should not have been there, other than the EMS coming in and doing an initial assessment. Obviously the patrol officers that are clearing the scene, and then CID people. I'd like to know how many elected officials walk through that scene. I have a real problem with elected officials at scenes, by the way. I've had horrible stories as a death investigator relative to that. They don't know what in the hell they're doing, and they can absolutely train wreck a case. And it's that narcissistic political beast. You want to be seen on camera. Election season's coming up. You want to appear to be tough on crime. Don't know if it happened. I have my suspicions. And the way it was processed, it was one of these things where it seemed like they didn't back out and take a beat. They didn't lock down that area. I mean, the whole damn area, as I think they should have, where you're going to create this static perimeter. I don't care what your excuse is, what your problems are. We're locking this thing down until we can get ERT out here, because we're in over our head, or at least the state police, and they're going to take charge of this. And I think that, look, you can, just like I'd mentioned with Pike County, Ohio, you can equally say that this type of thing doesn't happen, up there in Idaho at, IU. It just, or IU, just doesn't happen. This type of thing doesn't occur. And you can give them grace to a certain extent, but at some point in time, somebody's going to have to be the adult, and they're going to lock this whole thing down, and no one, and I mean no one, is getting in or out of there. And kind of one of the thing that really sent a shiver up my spine when all of this dropped, and I can speak to this as an authority because I am a college professor now. Kids are so ready to get out of town at Thanksgiving. You've had enough of them as a professor. They have had enough of you. And you couple that with this catastrophic event that has occurred. My biggest fear, Joe, was that, and I don't know if you recall this, but the media made a big deal out of people not coming back. And I know I'm preaching to the choir relative to this. You're a master at this. I am not. There's something to be said for sitting across the table from somebody, eyeball to eyeball, and taking a statement from them. Skype doesn't work. Phone calls don't work. And if they've flown the coop to mommy and daddy's house, are you ever going to be able to find them? Because a case this big with this many people kind of in this little universe that are circling it, you have no idea who saw these kids prior to, what kind of interactions occurred. But then they're talking about, well, people are going to finish their course of work at home, and so from an investigative standpoint, that was another layer to this that was quite terrifying, because I still don't know if circumstances were different, if you had somebody, this occurred in a gigantic apartment building in Manhattan, you could lock it down, and who's coming and going. Not this, man. It's just so fluid. And I'm wondering how many bits of information are just like running away from that location, and you'll never be able to get it. And even if you could go back and get those statements down, I don't know if they'd be worth the gunpowder to blow them to hell, because they're, memories are so eroded at this point and so traumatized and all those sorts of things. It was an absolute nightmare. It was the worst circumstances that this could have happened under.
Yeah, no, listen, I was pretty outspoken. I did a couple of news nations and a couple other different networks, and I was not happy. Listen, let's just point out a few things, right? They said they handed items back, personal items, to the family while they were still processing the crime scene. Now, if I had hair, Joe, I would have torn it out, because I'm like, you're not done yet. You don't hand anything back. All you're doing is handing a gift to the defense attorney saying, the stuff you gave back could have exonerated my client or had evidence of another perpetrator. I just, after a while, I kind of said, so what's going on here?
That in and of itself, and I crowed a lot about that, about releasing it, because it was really interesting. And you have these kind of moments in time that I found out, kind of working in the media, you'll have these other things that come up. I think I was on Law and Crime, and I appear on Law and Crime like 2 or 3 days a week, where I just do commentary. I'm just sitting there, like a color guy in a football game, baseball game. Pardon me. And I was covering the Parkland sentencing, and you talk about two things that are at opposite ends of the spectrum. And when they locked Parkland down, and I understand that it's a public building, that this is a school where this had taken, but the comments from the jurors, and the jurors are the real important people here, right? The comments from those jurors, when they took them on that tour of that place, and they said that they observed bloodstains, they observed, now remember, Parkland happened on Valentine's Day. There were dried up crushed roses laying about, little stuffed teddy bears, that people had given their Valentines. It was all still there, Joe. Yep. And you talk about contextualizing something. Now, with Idaho, you're talking about raising the building. And here's the other thing. When they hooked Laundrie up, there was something that was occurring at the same time. Do you remember they had pulled those trucks up outside of that building, and they were going in to clean that damn structure? Yeah. And they had to cease and desist at that moment. And they probably did that at the direction of his counsel that was provided to him in Pennsylvania. They said, whoa, we need our bite at the apple. So, interesting, and ironically enough, I think it was because of his defense team that they ceased that at that moment in time. But still, you've got these items walking out of the door. And I don't know. I guess they did a good enough job, that they could document everything. But look, unless you've got insulin in there, unless you've got something that is critical, go out and buy more clothes. I don't know what to say. Why are you going to allow these items that they say have personal value to individuals? Worked a lot of cases where things had personal value to individuals, but you don't cut the head off to cure the headache. It's a ridiculous idea.
No, and I actually, when I think it was News Nation, I said, this, as far as I'm concerned, effectively ended the crime scene. When you start handing stuff back, that's it. It's over. And then, like you said, you mentioned the cleaning company. And then they said, we're done. And then they had a video where these guys were coming in a black SUV in the middle of the night and coming out with more packages of stuff. Like, what on earth? And the person that you're referring to, right, the cop at the scene that's supposed to keep a record, right? So we have the gatekeeper, and they have a crime scene log. who enters the crime scene, when they enter it, when they leave. All that has to be done. I didn't see one time the cop outside writing anybody's name down or doing any of these things. I mean, yes, I was just watching some news clips. I wasn't there, of course, but just from I didn't see any of that. I mean, I'm hoping there was a crime scene log inside the house where they walked in and then signed in and signed out. But you know as well as I do, Joe, if there isn't somebody saying sign in, yeah, sign in.
Exterior, yeah, you got to have somebody there that is that point of contact and accountability, and asking questions. What's your purpose for being here? And I guess there's this side of me that has always just desired to see a high-ranking individual be brought into court and under subpoena and have them stand and deliver on the stand and say, what was your purpose at the scene?
Yep.
What did you accomplish by being there? And just to teach a lesson to everybody that this is, this is just something. And look, you and I have sat in classes forever, professional classes, where they teach this stuff forever and ever, and it still doesn't sink in. After all of these years, you still see this. And so that's problematic. And I know that, this is kind of in the weeds for the audience, but this is the bread and butter of what you do, relative to any kind of death scene. And you do it with every scene, hopefully. And it's just more complex when you get it at this level with this many deceased that are there. And I think that lots of folks probably think that, see, how can I frame this? A lot of people probably think that folks have everybody's best interest at heart, that are going to show up to a crime scene. Well, first off, if you have no business at the crime scene, why are you there? Is it because of the salacious nature of it? Because I got to tell you, I worked a lot of natural deaths involving, as we call them in the South, mamas, that have passed away peacefully in their sleep, surrounded by their family. I didn't have people showing up at the door to come in and see Mama's body, but you get a homicide. You get blood deposition everywhere, or you get a dismemberment. Everybody wants to show up. Everybody wants to show up, and everybody wants to see it. And so that's my big question. And the best way to do it is, in the words of Barney Fife, nip it in the bud as expeditiously as you possibly can.
And it was something that, I always told the uniform cop outside the door, I said, I don't care who they are, chief or not, you write their name down. If they refuse to, just write them down, because I'm going to give it to the district attorney and let them call them in and let them explain why they were there. Now, most of the chiefs and personnel, and even some of the local, all you have to do that is once, or say it once and say, why are you taking my name down? Well, this list goes to the district attorney, and you'll show up on a possible witness list. Some of them just would do a U-turn and just walk away and not even say another word. So, I mean, it all depends on how you, the supervisor, handle it, right? I mean, it's uncomfortable telling somebody, 10 ranks higher than you that you're not allowed into the crime scene. You come in, but your name's going on the list, man.
Yeah, it really is. And you have, and most of the time it's going to be some low-ranking uniform that's going to be there. I mean, God bless them. You got to learn it, early on. I've always thought that maybe it would be more advantageous to have a salty sergeant that's standing out there that can eyeball somebody and say, you're not going to do this. We have accountability here. What's your purpose for being here? State your purpose. And every time they walk in and out of that door, their name goes into that logbook, and the time is annotated. The date obviously is annotated, and their purpose for being there is annotated as well. You're a photographer, or you're a scribe, for one of the detectives, or you're with the ME, or what, you're a trace evidence person. And you can knock things down really, really quickly as far as problems arising, looking down the path. And it's old guys like me that, I'm chief among sinners. I've screwed up a lot of cases in my career. And so I didn't get this gray hair, it arose from my screw ups. It is how you learn.
That's how we learned. I mean, we all made mistakes, and that's why you say, I'll never do it again. But there are certain things that are unbreakable rules, and controlling the crime scene is number one.
Yes, it is. Most definitely.
Because if not, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but if I'm the defense attorney, this is where I'm hanging my hat from the very beginning of this case.
One of the points I always make to when I'm lecturing, I teach undergraduates and graduates, but primarily undergraduates, and particularly when I'm teaching either an intro to forensics class or my medical legal death investigation class. I will tell my students, because most of them are kids, not too far removed from high school, they've never been on a crime scene. And I'll say, we're going to pretend for the rest of the semester that we've got 12 impaneled people that are sitting over here watching everything we do in class. And so we have to have accountability. So any misstep that we make, any comment that's made, any action that we take can go to this idea of reasonable doubt. And it's that easy because lawyers are going to lawyer. That's what they do. That's why they make the big bucks, right? Well, some of them do. And so their task is to get their client off the hook at this point in time. And they don't care what a good person you are. They don't care what a fine parent you are, or if you work at the soup kitchen. They could care less. They're going to get you on the stand. They're going to rip you to shreds up there. And so you have to be very, very careful with everything you say and everything you do as you're processing these things, because you get one shot at it. And once you cross the threshold for the first time, you can't go back and cross it again for the first time. The bell has rung at that point.
Right. And, you're dealing with a police department. I mean, we know there was inexperience in regards to handling a homicide. I mean, the whole state, I think there was only 40 homicides in the entire state. So having 4 of them at one time is a huge deal. And these people, these officers and detectives have probably not testified in a homicide. I hope they get some training before they go on the stand, because if not, this is going to be a field day for a defense attorney. And this
it really is. And this is more in my area, and I'll speak to this very briefly. I don't want to, take up a lot of your time with it, but one of the major problems that I had also, I refer to it as an investigative bubble when I talk about, because I'm on the medical legal side of the house. I'm the eyes and ears of forensic pathologist out in the field. I don't claim to be a police officer. It's not my bag. It's not what I do. I'm a forensic scientist. And so, but I'm part of a team. I know that our goals are different. Okay. But I know that there's a time when I'm supposed to keep my mouth shut. And one of the things about Idaho, I think, and I'll say it plainly right now, was the choices that were made by the coroner early on. And that individual made statements prior to the police saying anything. And, you've got these kind of vague comments that were made about injuries and all these sorts of things, and that they were sleeping when it happened, that everybody was sleeping. And first off, there's no way to ascertain that. And secondly, you can say someone was in bed. I don't even think that I would want to say that at that point in time. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't want to say a damn thing. I'm going to offer my information to the pathologist that's doing the autopsy. And by the way, those autopsies were not done there. They had to be transported somewhere else to be done, just like in Rexburg with Lori Vallow and those cases down there. So, you've got a state that doesn't deal in a lot of homicides. And you've got a coroner who is making comments that kind of burst that investigative bubble. And when you do that, that erodes trust. And, in order to be within that bubble, you have to maintain trust and maintain those relationships with everybody. Because, if I were a police officer and I had somebody running my mouth on the corner side of the house or ME side of the house, I'm not going to give you any information in the future. Because you're going to train wreck the case, perhaps. If you can't keep your mouth shut, then, there's help wanted all over the place.
Yeah, that was an unusual move to do some media interviews in regards to that. I mean, if I was the chief, I would have went absolutely nuts. I mean, they did shut her down. I mean, she didn't show up after a while. But the damage, like I always say, has already been done. You've already let the cat out of the bag in certain things.
You can't unring the bell.
Yeah. And put the toothpaste back in the tube after it's done. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, If you guys are just joining us now, we're up to 157 people watching us live. Joe Scott Morgan, we're just breaking down the Idaho evidence in the case in that, and we're going to be shifting to another case in a second. But is there anything else about the, before we go on to the next case I would like to talk about, anything else about the Idaho case that bothers you, forensically speaking, anyway?
I think, I don't know, bother as much as
worried about?
Well, the car. The car,
what's in it?
From a forensic standpoint, is one of the things that troubles me, because I went on the record and made this comment that multiple times that the car's a rolling crime scene. Because when I saw the interior of that car, when they pulled him over in Indiana with his pops in the front seat, you can tell that this is not a top line car. It's not, it doesn't have faux leather seats or leather seats. Certainly, you've got a lot of fabric in there. And my thought was, I've been on multiple stab wound cases like this where I have scenes that are awash in blood. Probably the most brutal cases, even they surpass gunshot wound cases for me, multiple gunshot wound cases, because they are absolutely so personal and horrific. You've got commingling of blood. I mean, it's just everywhere. It's just effuse with evidence, biological evidence. And my thought had always been, okay, whoever did this, when they exfilled from the scene, made it back to whatever conveyance that they were, driving at the time, we were going to have a lot of contact trace evidence that was in that vehicle. Those for, I don't know about y'all, I'm not a rich person. I don't ride around in leather appointed vehicles. I've got old cloth seats in my car, and I know how, and plus I got grandbabies. So I can take chocolate milk, goldfish
French fries
crackers.
everywhere.
Yeah. Goldfish and Cheez-Its, they're crumbled up. They're everywhere, and yeah, gee, Papa, I'm sorry I spilled my drink. I don't care. I mean, but I do know that, just like Edmond Lacard said all those years, every contact leaves a trace. And so you're leaving something behind in that vehicle. And I'm, and I, knowing what I know of how cars are processed, particularly nowadays, when they collected that vehicle, I had visions of it probably going to the FBI garage, maybe in Philly or someplace like that. And this thing was going to be completely dismantled. I mean, they're going to take this thing down to the ribs, taking out the headliner, the gear lever, the steering wheel's coming off, dash is coming off. They're pulling up all that carpet. The seats are coming out, and they're going to look over this thing stem to stern. And still to this point, I haven't heard anything about any kind of biological evidence that was, harvested out of there. As a matter of fact, to the contrary, I think that they're saying there was no DNA evidence that had linkage. And so that was the big disappointment for me. And, and I go back to, how long he was in possession of that vehicle while in Idaho, weeks, and then how long he still had it when they're going down the road. And of course, the team that was sitting on him saw him cleaning, and removing stuff and all this sort of thing. So that was something it's very intriguing to me, at least from a scientific standpoint.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And just for those that are watching us now, we're up to over 160. This is totally unscripted. Joe and I did not talk about this ahead of time. These are all ambush questions because, this is, I find that this is the best way when you have experts on. It's easy because, you know exactly where they're going to go. So I kind of led you to it because I've said the same thing. You could not have committed 4 knife murders like this and got into a vehicle and not left blood everywhere. I mean, and you're never going to clean it up either. But I think the defense attorneys were the ones that said there was nothing in the car, which is, not for me, anything the defense attorneys say is not, something I just discount anyway. But yeah, people are like, I want the knife. I'm like, I want the car. The car is where it's at.
I don't know if you saw this at CromCon. I did, just so folks get an idea. I've got a tremendously large head. I'll give you an idea of how big. This is the knife. I actually purchased it. It's rather robust. It's a knife similar to the one that they recovered. And as you can see, it's got the USMC stamp on it with the Eagle Globe and Anchor K-bar. the knife itself. And this is, and I know other people have done this on the air, but this is the snap that they're referring to. And I've often held that it's kind of an interesting dynamic, Joe, when you think about how this, and I just want everybody to be able to see this in case they haven't, kind of how this thing is manufactured. And I don't know this for a fact, but I have thought that perhaps as this thing is being actuated, it was done with an ungloved hand, because this is, they claim that the DNA was, I'm sorry, I'm getting this reversed. They're saying that the DNA was harvested off of the snap, and this thing's got a ridge on it right here. And I'm thinking that if it's touch DNA, that perhaps, and we slough thousands of dead skin cells every day, that if you're sitting there kind of actuating this thing back and forth like this, that perhaps as you drag your finger across this area, you're depositing, you're making a deposition there of some kind of biological material, and that's what they harvested out of there. Even if you went back to try to clean this thing, this kind of this edged area here that's obviously concave, you're not going to get down in there and swab this thing out like you were in the Marine Corps, where they would come by and check the snap. All my friends that are Marines, they would inspect this thing perhaps. But you look at this, and I really wonder if that's, where the deposition is. I don't know that we'll ever have the knife. The knife is a nasty bit of business. It's got, it came out of the box, Joe. You could shave a hair with it. It was that sharp and very robust. Marine Corps, and not just the Marine Corps, but the Navy and the Coasties have used this knife since World War II, or maybe a bit before it. And they kept it around, to do things. I mean, it wasn't just for, Marines utilized this combat knife, obviously, but sailors and Coasties, they use this stuff to cut rope with and to do all of the, utility stuff that they have to do on ships. So it's a real workhorse and has been for years and years. But I found it very fascinating that he is accused of, purchasing this particular knife, and that the knife has vanished, and they have no idea where it is. It's a very heavy implement. You can tell it's got that. It doesn't have that modern feel to it, like if you're talking about composite materials, like you would see, even with like handguns. If you're talking about holding a Glock, this knife feels like the equivalent of holding a 1911, 45 caliber pistol from World War II. It has that. It feels like a 57, Chevy bumper when you hold this thing. It's really heavy, and it's meant to do a lot of damage. And reflecting back, that the name K-Bar didn't arise immediately, but they knew they were onto something because they kept referring to, and I don't know where this information had leaked out from. This is before we ever knew about the sheath. They kept using the term Rambo knife, combat knife, hunting knife, and survival knife before they ever made it to K-Bar. And K-Bar is a specific brand. So that's always been another interesting piece to me. Another thing about the use of this knife, if it was the same knife that was used on each one of these victims, is this commingling of DNA. And I thought early on, from an investigative standpoint, that this would be a real interesting assessment to do, where the person that had the least commingled DNA on them could potentially be the first victim. When you get downstairs, where Ethan was, along with Zana, if it's playing out like people are saying that it was, then they would have the most deposition on them from the folks upstairs. Do you see? And so it's almost like an inoculation, where you're moving about, and he would have to progress down the staircase with said knife that was bloody. And you're not going to get, even if he took it and wiped it off at that point in time, it's still going to be blood saturated. It's still going to be on his hands, because as I had stated, from my personal experience with sharp force injuries and cases that I've worked over the years, it's the bloodiest of all events. There's nothing that even remotely comes close to it, particularly when you have multiple victims like this. So it would have been a bloodbath, and I can only imagine what the interior of that home looked like.
Right, which makes me a little concerned about all the people that are going in and out, especially, I mean, with the blood spatter and the droplets. And I mean, he's either
Tracking.
walking up the right.
Yeah.
He's either walking up the stairs with the knife that was already been used, or walking down the stairs. He's going to leave a trail. We don't know if that exists, right? Because no one's actually ever said it. But
Nope.
so many people have been in there, and did they use proper, protective equipment when they went? Booties. Well, we know they're not wearing booties outside. We don't see anybody putting them on, but hopefully, maybe as soon as they walked in the door, and there's those stupid thumbs up things again. Jay, my buddy Jay keeps on trying to get me to turn them off. I think I did everything to do so, but it hasn't happened. But I mean, it's just absolutely nuts when that goes on.
I remember. I'll never forget the image I saw. I saw people inside the house that were wearing the Tyvek suits, bunny suits, and then exteriorly, you got people that are in street clothes, and I saw there's a couple of clips with people walking in. They're not putting shoe covers on. They certainly don't have hair covers on. And it's, and you can even go back to the Simpson case. One of the classic images there is you see I can't remember the criminalist's name. That was Dennis Fong. I think that was his name. Anyway, he's wearing a bunny suit outdoors, but he's surrounded by CID guys. None of them have on anything at all, and they're all kind of traipsing back and forth across the scene and everything. And again, just to highlight this, that's the kind of thing that if a defense attorney sees it, it goes to the heart of the case. You have to do every case every time. You do the same thing every time, and each case is going to be different, but you have to maintain these practices that are good practices over and over again, because you want to avoid these pitfalls. And buddy, let me tell you something, there's a lot of them here.
Oh God, yeah. So with the time that we have left, because this is going by so quick, I'm having a ball talking to you over here. Well, I want to talk about a case that a lot of people have been focused on. You actually did it at CrimeCon, Ellen Greenberg.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah. Ellen's case.
So Philadelphia case from January 26th, I think, if I recall correctly, 2011. Don't get mad at me if I'm wrong on that one, but I know it was in 2011, but it was in January. So the anniversary is coming up, right? So you're going to have 13 years of this thing. So 20 stab wounds that she suffered. Originally, the medical examiner had said homicide, and then they changed it to suicide. Now, I've had cases where people have used a knife. It's really rare, but there's lots of different types of things to show, right? So it's about the depth of the wounds, the hesitation wounds, all that stuff. But I've never seen one coming from the back ever. And then there's one huge deep wound in the back, in the head area that, I mean, would require a lot of force to do. And I don't know if you can get that kind of force from the back. I don't know, right? But I don't like how the investigation went, and I don't particularly care for how it's been handled since. But let me hear your take, Joe.
Yeah, an interesting little aside. I talked about Ellen's case with my classes. A lot of the stuff that I do on TV, I use it as kind of instructional points of instruction relative to the kids that I'm teaching at JSU. And so, pardon me, I had my students stand up, and they had partners, and they would face one another and then turn around, and I would ask them to make these motions with their hands to see what the range of motion would be, depending upon their dependent hand, if they're right-handed or left-handed, how far back. And if they had a pen, I would ask them to hold the pen in order to kind of, actualize this, to try to make that motion. Now, I've got really old, bad shoulders, so I can't.
It's two of us.
I certainly don't have the same range of motion I used to. The old jalopy's kind of broken down, but still, you've got this cluster of insults on her back, and some of them are kind of shallow. Not all of them are hugely penetrative. But you've got these cervical injuries that she has sustained. One in particular that's rather penetrates to some depth, and it brushes up against the brainstem, um, or immediately adjacent to the brainstem. And it didn't seem plausible to me that this was in fact a self-inflicted event with. And here's the thing, going back to sharp force injuries, and I think everybody in the chat right now, just think just for a second, all of us have cut ourselves at some point in time, right? I used to have a horrible habit of not wrapping up my razor in my shaving kit before I'd leave, and I'd stick my hand in there and I'd cut my fingertip. It happened to me multiple times. Had paper cuts. Cuts make our pain centers absolutely scream. That's one insult to our body. Can you imagine doing this over and over and over again? So that's why I've never bought into it. I had often compare Ellen's case to a case that I worked many years ago when I was a very young investigator in New Orleans, and I had a young man that he lived in his parents' attic. They had an attic apartment set up for him, and the reason he still lived with his parents, he's a grown man, is he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia many, many years ago, and they really had to monitor his medications and all those sorts of things. And he was very paranoid, just off the charts. He always thought people were listening to them. And he had this obsession with the CIA. And one day his mom goes upstairs and his door is locked, and he was forbidden from locking his door. And so his dad had to come up and jimmy the door and get in, and they found him there, and he's dead, and he's laying in a huge pool of blood. Well, this young man had taken a fillet knife, and from the heel of his hand to the crook of his arm, what we call in anatomy the antecubital fossa, right here, he had made 37 cuts, Joe. 37. And his forearm, the palmar aspect of his forearm, looked like a little leaflet book that you could flip through these thin slices. He was looking for a microphone in his forearm. But he's psychotic. Okay. Ellen Greenberg is not psychotic. She's got anxiety. She's dealt with depression. But who hasn't? Okay.
Like a lot of people.
Yeah. She's planning a wedding. She's cutting up fruit at her sink. I have questions about how the scene was actually processed and handled. It seems as though, to me, to my way of thinking at least, that this was pretty much early on. It had been decided by those in authority at the time that this was a suicide and that this was the way that they were going to roll with it. For whatever reason, I have no idea what influences were at work there. But the fact that this poor young woman, who seemed to have her entire life ahead of her, and had no kind of vocalized suicidal ideation at all, to the best of my knowledge, and I've spoken with both parents multiple times. I've been on Nancy's show with them multiple times. I've never heard them say that at all. I've never heard any of her peripherals say that. And also the way the post was handled, and I'll give you a little insight to this. I know we're short on time, but when they were going to do a neurological assessment on, and look this up yourself, don't believe me, assume I'm lying, okay? They were going to do a neurological assessment on anatomical assessment on Ellen's brain and her tissues, and the name escapes me right now. They being the forensic pathologist, stated in their initial autopsy report that her brain had been sent to, and forgive me, this lady's name escapes me. She is literally, Joe, one of the most renowned neuropathologists in the world. And when I say that, I mean, like, she's like, among female physicians, she's considered to be groundbreaking. Okay. She's at that level. She's like 80 or 90 years old or something. and she does private consults. Well, when these doctors do private consults, trust me, they bill for it. Okay. This pathologist stated in this autopsy report that he sent her tissues to this person, to this lady. This lady says, I've never seen these tissues. Never. And out of all the people that they could have chosen to do this, they choose one of the most high profile physicians, one of the most renowned in the world in her particular field. And she would have been grand at this. I think she started out in pediatric neuropathology is where she started. She's been a teacher for years and years. She may have taught at Temple Medical School. I can't recall, but at any rate, or Penn, they listed her on the autopsy, and she says, I never saw this stuff. So when you have a problem like that, it's not just about the clinical practice or about the assessment of the pathologist. This goes to character, and it goes to thoroughness, because, we're a weird bunch of people in my field. But the one thing that you don't want to be accused of is being haphazard and not thorough, because that's kind of our bread and butter, because we look very granular, we get down into the weeds with a lot of this stuff. And just that alone was shocking to me. And I'm hoping for peace for her mama and daddy, because it's heartbreaking. I mean, it's absolutely heartbreaking. And for me, as a former medical legal death investigator, I have never encountered anything like this. That's why, I kind of, when Nancy's producer asked me to get involved with this thing, a few years back, I was like, yeah, I mean, just for the intellectual exercise, I'd like to take a look at it, because I've never encountered it. And I've talked to colleagues that have never encountered anything like this. And to frame it up, if you were to go to an American Academy of Forensic Science meeting and attend the pathology section presentations, this is the kind of case where people from all over the world that are interested in forensic pathology, they'd fill the room up, because it's so bizarre. It's such an outlier. That's the nature of this case. So for me, I don't know that we'll ever have answers.
No, I mean, even for instance, the victim, Ellen, is sitting down. Her head is apparently down, right? So from that, and the 911 caller, I forget the guy's name. He said her face is purple. So we already have some livor mortis in there, right? Because her head, the blood is now settling into the front of her face. So, I mean, we really need to look at the estimated time of death too, as far as I'm concerned, in regards to when they start timing this and everything else. I mean, there's the door lock. There's a whole bunch of other things that they kind of dismissed, right? That whole door lock thing with that latch from the hotel. I've seen videos of people defeating that pretty easily.
Yeah, and crooks have known how to defeat these things forever. I always put a chair in front of my door when I stay on the road, because these latch things are easy to defeat by somebody that has the skill at it. I don't have the patience for it. I can't even put together jigsaw puzzles. I hate doing that crap. But yeah, I mean, if you're purposed in doing this, you can defeat that lock pretty easily. And then was it defeated and then made to look as though that it was some kind of forced event, or to go along with the kind of with the narrative that we're being asked to believe in this case. And yeah, the door lock was I think and somebody in the chat will know, I guess the guy that's done the most work on this is Fish. His last name's Fish. Does anybody know? I can't remember his first. Gavin. I think it's Gavin Fish.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And he's done a couple of demonstrations, I think, with the door. We actually rebuilt our Fox Nation came here with Nancy, and we recreated Ellen's apartment, or her kitchen, in the basement of our academic building, and filmed it. And talked about the blood deposition, her position adjacent to the cabinet. You've got that one big focal stain that is immediately adjacent to where you believe the back of her head was resting. And again, there would have been a considerable amount of blood, And from my understanding, there's not a lot of deposition all over the place. It's like kind of centralized in that one locale. I Going back to the dynamics of this and kind of how someone would go about this. For me, Joe, you would have to have some kind of trigger mechanism to get someone to get into the state of mind where they could inflict this much pain upon themselves in order to, turn this into a lethal event. Of course, the knife was eventually found buried in her chest when they arrived.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an awful case, like I said. And then I think they had just recently, the medical examiner had their assistant do it, and they said that one of the wounds was actually post-mortem, which then threw everything into a tizzy.
There was no hemorrhage in the wound tract, which of course is one of the reasons we dissect wound tracts in the morgue. Is the idea that you don't, when that knife passes through, keep getting reversed here, when the knife passes through that little wound tract, obviously, if you're in a living state, if it's an antemortem event, even if it's for the briefest of time, you're going to have little focal areas of hemorrhage that are going to track along that path that the knife traveled. And so if you're absent hemorrhage in that area, that's an indication that at best it's perimortem, where they're kind of in that twilight state, but more than likely it's a post-mortem event. You cannot talk your way out of that scientifically.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely crazy. So the Chester County's District Attorney's Office has the case. I don't know exactly where this is headed, but like everything else, this is a huge case on for people out there watching it, because people just can't believe it, and I can't believe some of it either. But here's another thing. They didn't take enough crime scene photos, which makes me nuts. I used to say, back in the day when I was doing this, everything was film.
Yep. 35.
So I used to tell them, take more photos. We're not paying for the film. The city's paying for the film. Take as many photographs as possible. You can.
Yeah.
And they didn't.
If you got to walk out with a sack of film cartridges, that's fine. Take as much as you possibly can. And nowadays, there's no excuse. Relative to digital photography, but even back then, it takes two shakes of a lamb's tail to reload a 35 millimeter camera, and just keep knocking them out, man, taking them from every kind of perspective that you can. And then you overshoot at the morgue as well. You go back and you take as many as you possibly can, because look, man, once it's gone, it's gone. And I try to preach this to young cops and also my students at a collegiate level. Don't be shy about depressing this thing and taking as many shots as you can with your camera, because once the scene is no longer pristine, that moment is gone in a flash. You can never recapture it. So you want to exhaust every possibility. I don't care if people are complaining, if somebody's like, it's my coffee break, smoke break, whatever it is that they do. I don't care. You're here to work this case until it is completed, because again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but once it's gone, it's gone. You cannot go back and place Ellen in that original spot, even if you wanted to contextualize it again. It's gone. So you have to shoot as much as you possibly can.
And treat every death as if it's a homicide until proven
Absolutely.
Otherwise. Period. So, Joe, listen, it was exactly how I thought this was going to be. This was absolutely phenomenal. I always enjoy speaking with you, but I think the people watching us,
you're the best, man. Thank you.
At one point, we had over 200 people watching us here. So, I mean,
cool.
It was definitely fun, fact finding, and also educational, which is something I always like to do in some of these things.
That's awesome. Well, all the best these holidays to all your fans, and it's an honor to be able to speak with each of you guys. I wish you all a safe and happy holiday season out there. And if you get a chance, please tune into my podcast. It's Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan, and I'm on Apple and iHeart and Spotify and Audible and all those various platforms. But we're trying to do good things right now, and just trying to keep it as sciencey as we possibly can.
Yep. And the link to Joe's show is in the show notes, so you can click on it. Right, goes right to the iHeartRadio link in there. So make sure you download it and watch it, or whatever device you'd like to use. Joe, listen, you have a great holiday, Happy New Year, and we'll see you in a couple of months. But we'll be talking soon.
All right, buddy. Take care.
Take care. Thanks,
Take care, everybody. All right. Bye-bye.